second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the IMF that has approved the 1.1 billion US dollars funding for Pakistan. On Monday, the executive board of the International Monetary Fund approved this disbursement, this immediate disbursement of approximately 1.1 billion US dollars. Dr. Usman Chohan, he's a leading economist, joins us online. Usman, thank you very much to have joined us. The IMF, I just said in my intro, has approved for immediate disbursement this $1.1 billion, this last final tranche of the standby arrangement with Pakistan. How important is this approval in your point of view for stabilizing, for strengthening Pakistan's economy?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. As always, it's a pleasure. The important thing is that this final tranche has been given. It is important for two reasons. One, it does help in boosting the foreign reserve count, but it isn't that significant amount in that regard. The more significant contribution is that it gives a good signal that Pakistan was able to successfully complete all tranches worth of progress in a standby agreement, which then paves the way to assure the world that Pakistan has managed to navigate and weather a difficult storm. So the signaling effect, I believe, is even more important than the actual sum.
All right. Wonderful. In a statement, the IMF says Pakistan's determined policy efforts under this standby arrangement of 2023 have brought progress in restoring economic stability. It says moderate growth has returned, external pressures eased, inflation begun to decline. Would you highlight some of the policy efforts?
Yes, I mean, there's a credit goes to several different ministries. All stakeholders, in fact, deserve some portion of the credit because it was quite sweeping in scope, the program, what it required. But the primary areas where I think it is laudable is that work was done in terms of curtailing the circular debt and working on the energy sector. Another one was taking a good hard look at the state-owned enterprises. A third was the management of the current account. So the difference between exports and imports, there were secondary consequences of and significant ones, we know that, but the current account has been kept under some measure of control. Similarly, strong efforts were made on revenue mobilization, so part of the fiscal deficit, and at the same time expenditures are being looked into. So in every aspect of what you would look at as your macroeconomic model, some work was done. Credit also goes in particular to the caretaker government for just keeping their heads down and working hard. And now this government has continued that work. And so it's a very good sign that so much work is done in so many things, pace by pace, and we need that continuity.
Well, speaking of continuity, our Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on the one hand expresses satisfaction over the release of the last financial tranche, but also talks about the tough decisions taken for economic security for Pakistan, which are yielding positive results. He says taking loan is not a success. Our success will when we will be able to clear it. In that context, what kind of decisions, tough or otherwise, are needed to take our economy in the right direction?
Well, we continue to struggle above all with the cancer of inflation, as does much of the world. So inflation is one that still needs to be reined in, which is to say that even though we have quarter-on-quarter or year-on-year comparators that would suggest inflation coming down, it still remains high. And that's not just true of Pakistan. The United States also had a shocking inflation result. So inflation is a very big one. And so monetary tools are the first area of attack on that, where you have the interest rate, you have the money supply, the banking system, all of those things. But at the same time, the fiscal elements are also, I think, where tough decisions are required. Revenue collection is not easy. I mean, we are looking at trying to expand or widen the tax net. I think that width is important rather than the depth of the tax, because the ordinary taxpayer, somebody already in the tax net, can only be squeezed so hard. So there's tough decisions on that. And I think the most politically contentious one is always the reconciliation of the budget, which is to say, curtailing your expenditures, because where are you going to find the cuts and who are you going to get the cuts from? That's where I think any society has the biggest struggle, and I think that's what the Prime Minister has foremost in his mind with respect to taking tough decisions to take our economy in the right direction. So I think the expenditure side and the fiscal element, I think this is the big question now.
Now, Usman, I now refer to the IMF statement that was taken out after the last tranche was released. And it talks about emphasizing on the continued projection of the most vulnerable sections of the Pakistani society, accelerating structural reforms to achieve strong long-term inclusive growth, advancing the reforms of state-owned enterprises. Of course, it talks about the significant challenges ahead as well, in which it says Pakistan needs to capitalize on its hard-won stability. It talks about preserving with sound macroeconomic policies and structural reforms to create stronger, inclusive and sustainable growth, and continued external support, the IMF report says, is also going to be critical. What kind of reforms are we looking at long-term and short-term?
You're absolutely right that the spokesperson identified many different things, and the two things that struck out to me are that climate resilience was an important factor that was mentioned, and governance was also said that you need to work on your anti-corruption and institutional framework. So I think that reform is always a tricky one and an important one, but the state-owned enterprises seems foremost in the IMF's mind, and as you are well aware, Pakistan is working hard at looking at a host of them and is progressing at various levels of speed, but quite fast overall, in terms of recognizing that the burden of the state-owned enterprises under the umbrella of the IMF stipulations is a good time to get rid of these, because they simply didn't do what they were expected to do over a long horizon. So that's an important area. In addition, the portion of the statement that said continued external support will be critical, that is, I think, one thing that we have to keep in mind, that when they are projecting out what will be required for Pakistan to achieve that long-term inclusive and sustainable growth, they are looking at the need for stakeholders from outside, not just from inside. So we have to keep that in mind, that in their mind it's like that, and that we therefore have to keep in mind the relationship that Pakistan has with the international financial institutions, as well as how much reform needs to be done domestically on the issues we've discussed.
What about the fiscal reforms? What is the IMF expectation from Pakistan as far as those are concerned? It talks about a market-determined exchange rate to absorb external shocks and more inclusive growth as well. From the fiscal domain, what does that imply?
So the exchange rate is a monetary question, or it's not even monetary, it's just a separate item, where you look at how the rupee has worked. And historically, Pakistan's currency has depreciated about 7% a year, but because management of the currency kept it at a certain level for a prolonged period, the ultimate drops tend to be very shocking, very, very large depreciations, and that makes it hard to plan for business, also makes it hard for you and me, for the consumers, because we can't keep in mind what pace is changing in terms of at what pace the currency will change. So they say go for a market determined rate, but the currency markets are complex, because on the one hand you saw the tough action taken by the government last year, which was very good, and how the speculation in the rupee was effectively stopped. It was a very impressive effort. And at the same time, a global currency is traded 24 hours around the world. So there are also speculative attacks or other risks that emerge from outside. So having a market determined thing sounds nice, but we will have to maintain some degree of oversight and protection of the rupee, because it is vulnerable to larger forces. Plus, there are global shifts that are happening where other currencies are changing in value, inflation rates are different, energy crises are erupting. And so currency is one that I only partially would agree with the IMF, because yes, having a market-determined rate in principle is good. Actually, you will have to still make sure that speculation doesn't occur or attacks on your currency don't occur. So it's a mixed bag. And insofar, on your other part of your question about inclusive growth, the IMF's narrative has changed substantially over the last 25 years, where previously it was very much on the free market stuff, but since the West itself has divested itself or disabused itself of free market ideology to a considerable degree, inclusivity has become a bigger part of it. And I think that's a good thing, because in Pakistan, decision making and implementation, as well as the consequences of decisions, are shared things, shared experiences. So having inclusivity in terms of people reaping the rewards as well as making the investments is a very important thing. So I think that when the IMF stresses inclusivity, it is making an important point, and we also must make sure that our very large population, which is still a fast-growing population, has a stake in our economic success, and that the rewards pass down to all segments of society.
All right, Usman, the State Bank of Pakistan has left its key policy rate unchanged at 22% for the 7th consecutive time, and it has met with market expectations. The IMF on this very point says that the State Bank of Pakistan's tight monetary policy stance remains appropriate until inflation returns to more moderate levels. It talks about further improvement in the functioning of the foreign exchange market that we have already discussed, and supporting competitiveness and growth. How do you see this decision by the State Bank of Pakistan, and how do you see also the statement by the IMF?
Oh, this is an excellent point. So the State Bank of Pakistan, particularly since 2021, has become a very, very important player, an even more important player than it used to be. And that's not just on the currency side, but also in terms of regulation and oversight, and then also in terms of the interest rate. Pakistan's interest rate is very high by world standards, and that's partly because our inflation rate is very, very high. So to mitigate that, the cost of borrowing or the discount rate is maintained high, but you cannot have economic recovery, genuine economic recovery at 22% interest rate, because it is simply not lucrative enough to undertake productive economic activity. It's much better to just park your money in the bank and sit around and get 22% annually for doing nothing. That is part of the reason why the State Bank has a tough choice. The tough choice is between having its growth, the hot part, the acceleration of the economy after this difficult period, by lowering the interest rate. That'll spur activity, but at the same time doing at least part of the inflation curtailment through the interest rate, because our inflation numbers are still too high. They're high all around the world. So I think the SBP cannot make a clear decision. It is decided for now to keep it at 22, but in the long run, of course, no society can proceed at a permanent 22% interest rate, because that means that it's just too difficult to do anything ever. So we don't want that situation. With the timing of the SBP rate, some people have speculated that it is about time it comes down, but the IMF, as you correctly mentioned, has said no, not until there's serious change on the inflation side. But the inflation side is not entirely determined locally, because the energy crisis, the terrible things happening in the Middle East, all of these uncertainties, they make it so that inflation is not at satisfying levels just about anywhere. And that is true for us. Plus, we have a big cost push side. We have a supply chain issue. We have value addition issues. We have storage issues that impact the prices of things. Now, that means that we can...
Last question, Usman, last question, and I want a short answer. Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb says Pakistan is now eyeing a longer and larger economic bailout package with the IMF. The fund says it will support formulating a new economic program for Pakistan if the government seeks one. How should Pakistan move forward in that direction?
Ideally, I would not want us to be dependent on the IMF, but it appears that the current circumstances necessitate a continued engagement with the IMF, not just for having the foreign exchange part, but also for having the impetus for reforms. So I think that we will go ahead with the program, and if we make the most of it, then in subsequent years we won't require IMF assistance, and that's what I'm hoping for the future beyond this.
All right, let's stay cautiously optimistic, and as our Prime Minister also said, the day when we'll be able to repay everything will be the day that will be of a huge sigh of relief as far as Pakistan is concerned. Thank you very much, Usman Chohan, leading political economist, to have joined us to discuss about the IMF latest tranche as well as Pakistan's relationship with the IMF. Let's come to our last two stories very, very quickly. The first is on Pakistan's first digital city, where under the Special Investment Facilitation Council, otherwise known as the SIFC, a new arrangement worth 8 billion rupees has been signed for the establishment of a Pakistan digital city in Haripur. This agreement has been signed between the Special Technology Zones Authority, the STZA, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Information Technology Board. This city is going to be Pakistan's first tax-free zone. All the companies operating within it will be exempted from tax for the next period of 10 years. About 4,000 IT startups can be established in the city, which spans over 11 acres of land, will be fully operational by the year 2026. It is hoping that it will not only increase the IT exports to over $50 million, 50, but will also provide employment opportunities to IT graduates. 30% of work on the digital city has already been completed, and investment of 1,642 million rupees has also been made in the city under NESPAC and National Logistics Cell. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the James Webb Telescope that belongs to NASA, that has captured the most detailed infrared images ever taken of the Horse Head Nebula. This is, of course, you can see in the parallel windows as well, one of the most majestic and recognizable objects in the night sky. The new observations show the top of the horse's mane, revealing for the first time the small scale structures that you might be able to recognize also in the window on the edge of the giant cloud of dust and gas. This nebula is located around 1300 light years away in the constellation Orion the Hunter. The iconic silhouette of a horse's head and neck rises from what looks like churning waves of interstellar foam. What a beautiful era this is to have these scientific discoveries emanate from different sectors, and us advancing in the realm of understanding our past, the past of the universe, and revealing more of what the universe has to show us and has in store for us. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's Newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news story segments pertaining to us in Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.